Clint Eastwood sat through the insult, then closed his notebook and ended the deal. A conference room at a major talent agency had become the setting for a negotiation that would become legendary in Hollywood circles. Clint Eastwood sat across from agent Martin Feldstein, discussing a potential collaboration that could have earned both parties millions. The meeting had been productive until Martin decided to demonstrate his negotiating prowess by insulting Clint's recent directorial choices in front of 6 other people in the room. "Let's be honest," Martin said with a smile. "Your last few films have been the work of someone who doesn't understand the modern audience. You need us more than we need you." Clint Eastwood said nothing. He let Martin finish his critique, his monologue about market realities, his condescending explanation of what Clint needed to remain relevant. Then Clint closed his notebook, stood up, and walked out without saying a word. Within a year, Martin Feldstein's career was over, not because of revenge, but because the industry learned exactly who he was. The agency's conference room was designed to impress. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Century City, a mahogany table that could seat 20, leather chairs that cost more than most people's cars. The entire space communicated one message: power resides here. Martin Feldstein sat at the head of the table. He had been an agent for 18 years, rising through the ranks to become one of the most influential dealmakers in Hollywood. His client list included A-list actors, directors, and producers. His reputation was built on aggressive negotiation and a willingness to say things others wouldn't. Today, he was meeting with Clint Eastwood. The purpose was straightforward: discussing a potential project that would involve several of Martin's clients working with Clint's production company. The financial stakes were substantial. The creative potential was significant. Martin had prepared extensively for the meeting. He believed he understood exactly how to handle someone like Clint Eastwood, an aging star who needed to be reminded of his place in the current market landscape. Clint arrived exactly on time. He was accompanied by his longtime business partner and a young assistant who took notes throughout meetings. They settled into chairs across from Martin and his team of associates. "Thank you for coming," Martin began. "We're excited about the possibilities here. As are we." Before we dive into specifics, I want to establish some context. The landscape has changed significantly in recent years. Audience preferences have shifted. What worked 10 years ago doesn't necessarily work today. I'm aware of industry changes. Of course you are. But awareness and adaptation are different things. The question is whether your approach can evolve to meet contemporary demands. Clint's expression remained neutral. "What specifically concerns you about my approach?" Martin smiled. This was the opening he had been waiting for. "Let me be direct," Martin said, leaning forward in his chair. "Your recent directorial work has been, how should I put this, uneven. The projects have shown artistic ambition but questionable commercial judgment." "Uneven how?" "You've made films that critics appreciate, but audiences don't necessarily support, in the numbers that justify their budgets. You've pursued projects that seem personally meaningful, but don't align with what the market wants. The films have been profitable, marginally profitable, not the returns that justify the resources involved, not the kind of success that commands premium positioning." Martin's associates nodded in agreement, a choreographed display of consensus. "I appreciate the analysis," Clint said. "Is there more?" "There's quite a bit more, but the fundamental point is this: you need us more than we need you." The words hung in the air. Martin continued, apparently unaware of or unconcerned by the shift in atmosphere. "Let's be honest. Your last few films have been the work of someone who doesn't understand the modern audience. The themes are dated. The pacing is slow. The sensibility belongs to a different era." "I see. Our clients represent the future of this industry. They understand what audiences want. They can help you remain relevant in a marketplace that's increasingly leaving you behind. And your role in this arrangement? We facilitate. We provide access to talent you couldn't attract on your own. We bring connections and credibility that enhance your projects." Connections and credibility. Exactly. Without us, you're an aging filmmaker making small pictures for diminishing audiences. With us, you're part of something larger, something that can sustain your relevance for another decade. Clint Eastwood said nothing. He sat in his chair, his expression unchanged, while Martin elaborated on his vision. The critique continued. Observations about market positioning, audience demographics, the importance of aligning with emerging trends. The associates contributed occasional comments that reinforced Martin's points. The performance was clearly rehearsed, designed to establish dominance, to make Clint feel that he needed this deal more than he had realized. Clint's business partner shifted uncomfortably. His assistant stopped taking notes. The room filled with Martin's voice and nothing else. Clint listened. He listened to every word, every condescending observation, every assessment of his declining relevance. He let Martin finish completely. Then he closed his notebook. Clint stood up. The movement was unhurried, deliberate, the action of someone who had made a decision and saw no reason to delay implementing it. "Thank you for your time," he said. Martin looked confused. "Wait, we haven't discussed the terms yet. The actual deal structure. There won't be a deal." "What do you mean? We're just getting started." "No, we're finished." Clint picked up his notebook and walked toward the door. His business partner and assistant followed. "You can't just leave," Martin said, his confident demeanor cracking. "This meeting was scheduled for 2 hours. We have substantive matters to discuss." Clint paused at the door. "You've spent the last 20 minutes explaining why I need you. You've insulted my work, questioned my judgment, and suggested that my value depends on your involvement. I don't negotiate with people who think that way. I was establishing context. You were being disrespectful. There's a difference." Clint walked out. Martin Feldstein sat in the conference room, surrounded by his associates, trying to process what had just happened. "He'll call back," one associate said. "He's bluffing. The deal makes too much sense financially." "Obviously," Martin agreed. "He's just making a point. By tomorrow he'll realize he overreacted." "Should we reach out? Maybe soften the approach?" "Absolutely not. That would signal weakness. We wait for him to come to us." They waited. Clint Eastwood never called back. Hollywood is a small community. Word of what happened in that conference room spread within days. Not through press releases or public statements, but through the informal networks that actually governed the industry. "Did you hear about the meeting with Clint Eastwood? The one where Martin told him he was irrelevant?" Clint walked out, just stood up and left. What did Martin expect? You don't talk to someone like that. Martin thought he was establishing leverage. Martin thought wrong. The story grew with each retelling, but the core remained accurate. An agent had insulted a filmmaker to establish negotiating dominance. The filmmaker had responded by ending the negotiation entirely. No drama, no argument, just a closed notebook and a walk to the door. Martin Feldstein's reputation began to shift. The clients on his roster started asking questions. If he had treated Clint Eastwood that way, how had he treated them in negotiations they weren't present for? What had he said about them to potential collaborators? What condescension had he expressed when they weren't in the room? Some clients requested changes in representation. Others simply stopped returning calls as quickly. The agency noticed. "Martin, we need to talk about your client retention numbers. This is temporary. The Eastwood situation created some noise, but it will settle. It's been 3 months. It's not settling. These things take time. We may not have time." Within 6 months, Martin Feldstein's position at the agency had become precarious. His client list had shrunk significantly. The relationships he had built over 18 years were fraying. The reputation for aggressive negotiation that had once been an asset was now being described differently. Aggressive became disrespectful. Confident became arrogant. Direct became insulting. The same qualities that had driven his rise were now accelerating his fall. Projects he had been developing fell apart when talent withdrew. Deals he had been negotiating collapsed when the other parties learned of the Eastwood incident and reconsidered whether they wanted to work with him. His partners at the agency called a meeting. "Martin, we have a problem." The conference room was the same one where the Eastwood meeting had occurred. Martin sat where Clint had sat, facing his partners across the mahogany table. "The client losses are significant. The reputational damage is ongoing. We need to discuss your future with the firm. This is about one incident. This is about a pattern that one incident exposed. The Eastwood situation didn't create problems. It revealed problems that already existed. I've been with this agency for 18 years, and we've valued that service. But the industry has changed. The way you do business isn't working anymore. The approach that made you successful is now making everyone uncomfortable." "What are you saying?" "We're saying it's time to consider your options." Martin Feldstein left the agency by the end of the year. The separation was described publicly as mutual, but everyone understood what had actually happened. An agent who had overplayed his hand, who had mistaken rudeness for strength, who had believed his position entitled him to treat people however he wanted. That agent had discovered the limits of his approach. He tried to rebuild elsewhere. He approached other agencies, pitched himself as an independent representative, explored producing opportunities. But the story followed him. Isn't that the guy who insulted Clint Eastwood? The one who said his work was irrelevant? What did he expect? You don't talk to people like that. Doors that should have opened remained closed. Conversations that should have progressed went nowhere. The industry had rendered its judgment. In the quiet of his apartment, Martin Feldstein thought about what had happened. He had entered that conference room believing he held the power. He had delivered his critique expecting Clint Eastwood to absorb it, to recognize the truth of the market analysis, to negotiate from a position of acknowledged weakness. Instead, Clint had simply left. No argument, no defense, no negotiation. Just a closed notebook and a walk to the door. That quiet response had been more devastating than any shouting match could have been. Martin had expected resistance. He had prepared for pushback. He had anticipated a back and forth where he could demonstrate his negotiating skills. What he hadn't prepared for was someone who simply refused to engage, someone who recognized disrespect and responded to it by withdrawing entirely, someone who understood that the best response to an insult wasn't a counter-insult, it was removal of opportunity. The incident taught the industry a lesson that was discussed for years afterward. Negotiating strength wasn't about dominance. It wasn't about making the other party feel small. It wasn't about establishing hierarchies through condescension. Real negotiating strength came from being willing to walk away and being able to absorb the consequences of that decision. Clint Eastwood could afford to walk away from Martin Feldstein's deal. His career, his reputation, his options didn't depend on any single negotiation. Martin Feldstein, despite his impressive client list and confident demeanor, couldn't afford to lose Clint Eastwood's business, especially not in a way that made the entire industry question his judgment. The power dynamics had been exactly opposite to what Martin believed. He had mistaken his position for power. He had mistaken his ability to speak for the ability to control. He had mistaken Clint's silence for submission when it was actually assessment. What could Martin have done differently? He could have shown respect while still advocating for his position. He could have acknowledged Clint's experience and track record while suggesting opportunities for collaboration. He could have treated the meeting as a partnership discussion rather than a dominance display. He could have recognized that insulting someone you want to work with is fundamentally self-defeating. The deal he had been pursuing made financial sense for everyone involved. The collaboration would have been genuinely valuable. The opportunity was real. All of it was sacrificed because Martin chose to establish his importance through condescension rather than through the quality of what he was offering. The incident revealed something important about character. Clint Eastwood could have argued. He could have defended his work. He could have pointed out the flaws in Martin's analysis, the successes Martin was ignoring, the value he brought to any project. Instead, he simply left. That choice to not engage with disrespect, to not dignify insults with responses, to simply remove himself from an unacceptable situation, demonstrated a form of strength that Martin had never encountered. It was the strength of someone who didn't need validation from others. The strength of someone who understood that some battles aren't worth fighting. The strength of someone who knew that walking away could be more powerful than staying and competing. The film industry absorbed the lesson. In negotiation training sessions, the incident was referenced as an example of what not to do. Agents and executives learned that establishing leverage through disrespect was a short-term tactic with long-term consequences. Remember what happened to Martin Feldstein. He thought being aggressive meant being insulting. He thought his position protected him from consequences. He was wrong. The story became a cautionary tale, a reminder that reputation in Hollywood was built not just on deals closed, but on relationships maintained. People wanted to work with people who treated them well. People remembered how they were treated, even when they didn't respond in the moment. People had options, and disrespect made them exercise those options elsewhere. 3 years after the original incident, Martin Feldstein encountered Clint Eastwood at an industry event. Martin had rebuilt some of his career, though not to its previous heights. He was working as an independent consultant, helping smaller productions navigate the industry landscape. Clint was attending a screening of his latest project. Their paths crossed in the lobby. "Mr. Eastwood." Clint turned, recognized him, nodded slightly. "Martin, I wanted to say I've thought a lot about our meeting, about what I said. I was wrong. It was a long time ago. It cost me everything. my career, my reputation, my position in the industry, all because I thought being aggressive meant being disrespectful. What did you learn from it? Martin considered the question. I learned that power isn't about making other people feel small. I learned that silence can be more effective than argument. I learned that walking away is sometimes the strongest negotiating move. Anything else? I learned that reputation is built on how you treat people when you think you have the upper hand, and that people remember how you made them feel long after they forget what you said. Clint nodded. That's a lot to learn from one meeting. It took me years to actually understand it. In that conference room, I thought I was demonstrating strength. I was actually demonstrating weakness. The weakness of someone who needs to diminish others to feel important. And now I try to treat every person I meet with respect. Not because it's strategic, but because it's right. The strategic benefits are real, but they're not the reason. Clint Eastwood looked at Martin Feldstein for a long moment. I never intended for what happened to destroy your career. I know. You didn't do anything except leave a meeting where you were being disrespected. Everything that followed was a consequence of my own behavior, not your response. The industry can be harsh. The industry responded to what I revealed about myself. That's not harshness. That's accuracy. Clint extended his hand. Martin shook it. I hope things improve for you, Clint said. They have. Not to where they were, but to somewhere better. Somewhere I understand why I'm there. Clint nodded and walked toward the screening room. Martin watched him go. The encounter at the industry event became part of the larger story. People who had heard about the original incident now heard about the follow-up, about Martin's admission, about Clint's grace, about the handshake between two men who had been on opposite sides of a memorable confrontation. The story evolved from a cautionary tale into something more complex. It became a story about consequences and growth, about mistakes and learning, about the possibility of redemption even after significant failure. Martin Feldstein never fully recovered his previous status, but he built something different, a smaller practice based on principles he had learned the hard way. His clients were fewer but more satisfied. His relationships were deeper because they were built on respect rather than leverage. His reputation eventually incorporated both the failure and the growth that followed. The incident illustrated a principle that extended far beyond Hollywood negotiation. How you treat people when you have power over them reveals who you actually are. Martin Feldstein had believed his position entitled him to condescension. He had thought that being important meant he could treat others as less important. Clint Eastwood had demonstrated a different understanding. Power didn't require demonstration. It didn't require making others feel small. It didn't require establishing hierarchies through disrespect. Real power was quiet. Real power didn't need to announce itself. Real power could walk away from any situation that didn't meet its standards and could absorb the consequences of that decision. The closed notebook. The walk to the door. The silence where argument might have been expected. Those were the actions of someone who understood power better than someone who needed to display it. The story of the conference room meeting continued to circulate through Hollywood for years. Young agents heard it during training. Executives referenced it during negotiations. Filmmakers remembered it when they encountered disrespect. The lesson was simple but profound. Disrespect has consequences. Walking away is sometimes the strongest response. Character is revealed in how we treat others when we believe we hold the advantage. Clint Eastwood sat through the insult. He listened to every word. He let Martin Feldstein complete his condescending critique. Then he closed his notebook and ended the deal. No argument, no defense, no negotiation, just removal of opportunity. An executive laughed at Clint's position. 30 days later, he was looking for work. But this story was different. This wasn't about revenge or retaliation. This was about natural consequences. Martin Feldstein's career didn't end because Clint Eastwood sought to destroy him. It ended because Martin's behavior revealed something about his character that made the entire industry uncomfortable. The closed notebook wasn't a weapon. It was simply a choice. The choice to not engage with disrespect. The walk to the door wasn't punishment. It was simply removal. Removal from a situation that didn't meet acceptable standards. Everything that followed, the client losses, the career collapse, the eventual rebuilding, was the result of what Martin had revealed about himself, not what Clint had done to him. That was the real lesson. Character has consequences. Reputation is built on every interaction. And sometimes the most powerful response to an insult is simply to close your notebook and walk away.